My name is Wilder Sornel, and I fix things for a living. Security systems, mostly. Cameras, alarms, access controls for businesses around our little New England town. The irony wasn't lost on me that morning when I discovered my own life needed the most fixing of all. It started like any other Tuesday. The October air had that crisp bite that makes you think of apple cider and wood smoke, but all I could smell was the burnt coffee Ember had left in the pot before rushing out. Again. She'd been doing that a lot lately, rushing out with barely a goodbye, coming home after I was asleep, claiming the law firm was drowning her in cases. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, laid out like breadcrumbs for any fool willing to follow the trail. The new clothes that cost more than my truck payment, the way she'd clutch her phone like it contained state secrets, the sudden interest in working late on weekends, the credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, at times when she claimed to be buried in legal briefs. But you know what they say about hindsight. It's 2020. And I was apparently walking around half blind. I was in the kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee and scrolling through work emails on my tablet when Ember came thundering down the stairs like a woman fleeing a fire. Her auburn hair was still damp from the shower, and she was trying to apply lipstick while simultaneously shoving files into her briefcase. Late again? I asked, not looking up from my screen. Partner meeting got moved up, she said, her voice tight with that particular brand of stress that comes from juggling too many lies at once. Tessa thinks we might land the Morrison account if we can present this morning instead of this afternoon. Tessa Malden, Ember's best friend since law school, now a fellow partner at Hartwell, Riley & Associates. I'd never liked her much. Too calculating, too quick with the fake smile and the air kisses. But Ember swore by her, said Tessa was the reason she'd made partners so young. You eating anything? I asked, watching her dart around the kitchen like a hummingbird on espresso. I'll grab something on the way. She leaned down to kiss my forehead, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like checking off a box than showing affection. Don't wait up tonight. This Morrison thing is going to run late. And then she was gone, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, the front door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. I heard her BMW roar to life in the driveway, then fade as she sped toward town. That's when I noticed it, her phone sitting on the counter next to the coffee maker like a forgotten afterthought. Ember never forgot her phone. The woman slept with the thing under her pillow, checked it more often than most people blink. Leaving it behind was like leaving without her right arm. I almost called after her, almost grabbed my keys and chased her down. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd avoided eye contact during our entire 30-second conversation. Maybe it was the fact that she'd worn that particular shade of lipstick, the expensive one she saved for special occasions, to what was supposedly just another partner meeting. Or maybe it was the way the phone lit up at that exact moment, buzzing against the granite countertop like an angry wasp. The message preview showed on the lock screen, clear as daylight. Brooks, we're meeting like we planned. At the motel? Brooks Carvin, my brother. I stared at that message for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. My brain kept trying to process the words, to find some innocent explanation that would make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe Brooks needed legal advice. Maybe he was meeting someone else at a motel and wanted Ember's opinion on the situation. Maybe this was all some elaborate misunderstanding that would make us laugh at Christmas dinner. But even as I ran through these possibilities, I knew they were garbage. You don't ask your brother's wife about meeting at a motel unless you're doing something that requires privacy, discretion, and a place to lie down. I'd always known Brooks was jealous of what I had. Growing up, he'd been the golden child, star quarterback, class president, the one everyone expected to set the world on fire. Instead, he'd bounced from job to job, relationship to relationship, never quite living up to the promise everyone saw in him. Meanwhile, I'd built a solid business from nothing, married a beautiful lawyer, bought a house in the nice part of town. Brooks had been spending more time around our place lately, always with some excuse. He needed to borrow tools, he wanted advice on fixing his car, he missed hanging out with family. Ember had encouraged it, said it was sweet how he was trying to reconnect. Sweet. Right. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Brooks. Room 12 like always? I can be there by 8. Room 12 like always. The words hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was routine. This was always. I unlocked Ember's phone. She'd never changed her passcode, our anniversary date, which now seemed like the cruelest joke in the world. The message thread with Brooks went back months. Months of planning, coordination, and barely disguised desire. Can't wait to see you. Wish we didn't have to sneak around? Wilder's working late again. We have all evening. You make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten. That last one was from Ember, my wife, the woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me until we were both old and gray. I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one a small dagger between my ribs. They'd been meeting twice a week, sometimes more, always at the Red Maple Inn, a shabby little motel on Route 9 that catered to truckers and people who paid by the hour. They had a routine, a system. Brooks would book the room, Ember would arrive 20 minutes later. They'd even worked out a schedule around my business trips and her court appearances. The most recent exchange was from 3 days ago. Brooks: Tuesday at 8, same place? Ember: Perfect. Tessa's covering for me at the office. Tessa: Of course. The best friend who'd been encouraging Ember to work late, who'd been providing alibis and cover stories. I wondered how long she'd known, how many times she'd looked me in the eye and smiled while helping my wife cheat on me. I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built, holding the evidence of its destruction in my hands. Part of me wanted to smash the phone against the wall, to call Ember screaming, to drive to Brooks's house and have it out like men used to do. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I did what I do best. I made a plan. I replied to Brooks's message, typing as Ember: Yes, I have a surprise for you. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. I had a motel room to book. The Red Maple Inn looked exactly like what it was, a place where people came to do things they couldn't do at home. The paint was peeling, the neon sign flickered intermittently, and the parking lot was cracked asphalt held together by weeds and wishful thinking. It sat on a lonely stretch of Route 9, surrounded by scrub pines and the kind of businesses that thrived on anonymity. A pawn shop, a liquor store, and a diner that probably hadn't passed a health inspection since the Clinton administration. I pulled my truck into the lot and sat for a moment, watching the morning traffic crawl past. Commuters heading to their honest jobs, their intact marriages, their uncomplicated lives. I envied every single one of them. The motel office smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Behind the bulletproof glass sat a man who looked like he'd seen every variety of human weakness and stopped being surprised by any of it. His nameplate read, Mr. Dunn, Manager. Help you? He asked without looking up from his crossword puzzle. I need room 12 for tonight, 8 o'clock. That got his attention. He glanced up, took in my work clothes and honest face, and frowned. Room 12's already booked for tonight. Regular customer. Brooks Carvin? His frown deepened. You know I can't tell you that. I pulled out my wallet and placed a $100 bill on the counter. I'm not asking you to break any rules. I'm asking you to book me the same room an hour earlier. 7 o'clock. Whatever Mr. Carvin paid, I'll double it. Mr. Dunn stared at the money for a long moment. This some kind of setup? The kind where everyone gets exactly what they deserve. He thought about it, then nodded slowly. Cash up front, and I don't want any trouble. No trouble, I promised. Just truth. I paid for the room and drove home to prepare. My security business had taught me a few things about documentation and evidence. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. First, I copied the entire message thread between Ember and Brooks, forwarding it to a secure email account with timestamps intact. Then I screenshotted every relevant conversation, every damning exchange, every proof of their betrayal. I printed copies of everything and sealed them in an envelope with my name and the current date. Next came the technical preparations. I had a small, high-definition camera in my work van, the kind I used for security installations. Battery-powered, motion-activated, nearly invisible when properly positioned. I tested it twice to make sure it was working perfectly. The legal paperwork took longer. I'd been thinking about divorce for months without admitting it to myself, and now I was grateful for all those late-night internet searches about asset protection and adultery laws in our state. I'd already consulted with a lawyer, not anyone from Ember's firm, obviously, and had preliminary papers drawn up. All they needed was evidence and signatures. By noon, I was ready. I drove back to the Red Maple Inn with my equipment bag and my envelope of evidence. Mr. Dunn let me into room 12 without comment. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Faded carpet, mismatched furniture, and a bed that had seen more action than a war zone. But it was clean, and it had good sight lines to the door. I positioned the camera on the dresser, angled to capture anyone entering the room. Then I tested the lighting, the focus, the audio pickup. Everything was perfect. I left the sealed envelope with Mr. Dunn. If anything happens to me, give this to the police, I told him. He nodded like this was a perfectly normal request. Maybe in his line of work, it was. The afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. I went through the motions of my regular routine, answered emails, returned client calls, pretended my world wasn't about to explode, Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be Ember, panicking about her forgotten phone. But the call never came. At 6:30, I drove back to the motel. Mr. Dunn was waiting for me with a key and a witness, a thin man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as the motel's owner. Mr. Dunn explained the situation, he said. We don't usually get involved in domestic disputes, but adultery is bad for business. Makes us look sleazy. I almost laughed at that. The Red Maple Inn looked sleazy because it was sleazy, but I kept my mouth shut and nodded gravely. We'll stand by your documentation, the owner continued, as long as there's no violence. No violence, I agreed. Just consequences. We went to room 12 together. I checked the camera one more time, then settled into the chair by the window to wait. My phone showed 7:45. In 15 minutes, my marriage would officially end. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard car doors slam in the parking lot. Two voices, laughing and whispering. Ember's voice, bright with excitement. Brooks's voice, deeper, confident. They sounded happy. They sounded like lovers. Footsteps approached the door. A key turned in the lock. The door opened and they stepped inside together. Ember was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. Brooks had his hand on her waist, possessive and familiar. They saw me sitting in the chair and froze. The color drained from both their faces like someone had pulled a plug. Hello, Ember, I said calmly. Brooks? Ember's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Brooks took a step backward, his hand falling away from her waist. Wilder, Ember finally managed. What are you doing here? I got your message, I said, holding up her phone. About having a surprise. Turns out I had one too. I gestured to Mr. Dunn and the owner, who stepped into the doorway behind my cheating wife and brother. The camera was recording everything, their faces, their voices, their complete and utter shock at being caught. Gentlemen, I said to my witnesses, I'd like you to note that Mr. Brooks Carvin and Mrs. Ember Sornel entered this room together at 8:03 p.m. on Tuesday, October 15th. They have a key to this room, which was booked under Mr. Carvin's name for the purpose of conducting an extramarital affair. Wilder, please, Ember whispered. Let me explain. Explain what? I stood up slowly, pulling the legal papers from my jacket pocket. Explain how you've been meeting my brother here twice a week for the past 4 months. Explain how you've been using marital funds to pay for hotel rooms where you could betray your wedding vows. Explain how your best friend has been covering for you while you destroyed our marriage. Brooks found his voice. Look, man, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I handed Ember the divorce papers. Adultery. Misuse of marital assets. Emotional cruelty. It's all documented, witnessed, and recorded. Ember stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You can't do this. You can't just... I can, and I did. I turned to Brooks. As of 30 minutes ago, your access to the family account, the one you've been using to pay for these little rendezvous, has been revoked. I've also submitted a formal complaint to the Real Estate Licensing Board regarding your use of client funds for personal expenses. Brooks's face went pale. You wouldn't... I already did. I looked at both of them, these two people I'd loved and trusted, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The room key has been deactivated. Your little love nest is closed for business. I walked toward the door, pausing next to Ember. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Those tears were for getting caught, not for what she'd done. The truck will be by tomorrow to collect my things, I told her. Don't be there when it arrives. I left them standing in that shabby motel room, surrounded by the wreckage of their secret affair and my shattered marriage. As I walked to my truck, I could hear Ember calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The first phase of my plan was complete, but this was just the beginning. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The next morning brought the kind of autumn rain that turns the world gray and makes everything look like a crime scene. I sat in my truck outside Hartwell, Riley & Associates, watching the lawyers and paralegals scurry through the downpour like ants fleeing a disturbed hill. Somewhere in that glass and chrome monument to legal ambition, my soon-to-be ex-wife was probably explaining to her partners why she'd need some time off to deal with personal matters. I'd spent the night at Ray's boxing gym, sleeping on the couch in his office above the bar. Ray Torino had been my coach when I was young, and stupid enough to think I could make money getting punched in the face. Now he owned the gym and the bar downstairs, serving as unofficial therapist to half the working men in town. You look like hell, he'd said when I showed up at his door with a duffel bag and a face full of righteous anger. Feel worse, I'd replied. Ray had poured 2 whiskeys and listened while I told him the whole story. When I finished, he'd shaken his grizzled head and said, "Brother, you just opened a can of worms that's going to feed the whole town." He was right. By 10 a.m., my phone was buzzing with calls from unfamiliar numbers. News spreads quickly in a small town, especially when it involves scandal and 2 of the community's more prominent families. Mrs. Piltz, my overly curious neighbor, had apparently been recording my comings and goings for weeks, and now her amateur footage was circulating on social media. Wilder Sornel's Revenge Tour, one post called it. The video showed me loading boxes into my truck at 3 in the morning, my face grim and determined in the porch light. Mrs. Piltz had added her own commentary. "Always knew that marriage was headed for trouble. You can tell by the way they never waved at each other anymore." I ignored the calls and focused on the task at hand. Phase 2 of my plan required careful timing and absolute precision. I'd learned a lot about patience during my brief military stint, and even more during the lean years building my business. Good things came to those who waited. Great things came to those who waited and planned. At 11:30, I walked into the offices of Hartwell, Riley, and Associates, like I owned the place. The receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes and an expensive manicure, looked up from her computer with the kind of smile reserved for potential clients with deep pockets. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Wilder Sornel to see Tessa Malden. She's expecting me." She wasn't, of course, but the receptionist didn't know that. She made a quick call, spoke in hushed tones, then hung up with a puzzled expression. "Ms. Malden says she doesn't have you on her calendar." "Tell her it's about Ember's situation. She'll want to see me." Another call, another whispered conversation. This time, when she hung up, her smile was strained. "Conference room 3, down the hall, second door on your right." Tessa was waiting for me when I arrived, her perfectly styled blonde hair and power suit making her look like she'd stepped out of a legal drama, but her eyes were wary, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for me to sit. "Wilder, I'm so sorry about what happened. Ember is devastated." "I'm sure she is." I settled into the leather chair across from her and smiled. Devastated about getting caught, anyway. Tessa's composure slipped for just a moment. "Look, I know you're angry, but..." "Angry?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Tessa, I'm not angry. I'm grateful. You helped me see the truth about my marriage, about my brother, about the kind of people I was surrounding myself with." She shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conversational whisper. "You've been covering for them for months, providing alibis, making excuses, helping them coordinate their little trysts. You knew exactly what was happening, and you encouraged it." "That's not... I would never..." "Room 12 at the Red Maple Inn. Tuesdays and Fridays, usually around 8, sometimes Thursday afternoons when I was out on service calls. You told Ember when my schedule was clear, didn't you? Made sure she knew when it was safe to sneak around." Tessa's face had gone pale, but she maintained her lawyer's composure. Even if that were true, there's nothing illegal about helping someone commit adultery? You're right. But there might be something illegal about the way you've been billing clients for hours you spent planning my wife's affair." That hit home. Tessa's eyes widened, and she leaned back in her chair like I'd slapped her. "I have records, Tessa. Phone calls, text messages, credit card receipts. All those long lunches where you and Ember planned her next rendezvous. All those late-night strategy sessions that got billed to the Morrison account. The partners here are very strict about ethical billing practices, aren't they?" "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of Ember's calendar, cross-referenced with billing records I'd obtained through some creative social engineering. "March 15th. You billed 3 hours to Morrison Industries while having lunch with Ember at the Riverside Grill, helping her plan Brooks's birthday surprise. Want to guess what that surprise was?" Tessa stared at the evidence, her lawyer's mind probably calculating damages and consequences. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You helped destroy my marriage for what? Entertainment? Some twisted sense of female solidarity? Because you thought it would be fun to watch me get humiliated? It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her manicured hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You fired me." "What?" 5 years ago. When you were expanding your business, you needed legal help with contracts and licensing. I gave you a quote, and you said it was too expensive. You hired some cut-rate lawyer from Springfield instead." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "You orchestrated this whole thing because I didn't hire you for a business contract?" "You made me look like a fool in front of Ember. She kept asking why her best friend couldn't handle her husband's simple legal work. You embarrassed me. So you decided to destroy my marriage? I decided to show Ember what kind of man she'd married. Someone who valued money over loyalty, who would throw away relationships for the sake of saving a few dollars. The pieces were falling into place now. Tessa hadn't just been covering for the affair, she'd been orchestrating it, encouraging it, feeding Ember's dissatisfaction and Brooks's jealousy until they'd found each other in that seedy motel room. You introduced them, I said, at your birthday party last year. You made sure they had time alone together, made sure they knew how unhappy they both were. Tessa's silence was answer enough. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. Well, congratulations. You got your revenge. My marriage is over, my brother is a stranger, and I'm sleeping on a couch above a boxing gym. I hope it was worth it. Wilder, wait! But I was already walking away, leaving her alone in that sterile conference room with her guilt and her perfectly planned revenge. I had bigger fish to fry. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my truck, and pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds like a promise. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, processing everything I'd learned. Tessa had manipulated my wife and brother into betraying me, all because of some perceived slight from years ago. The affair wasn't just about lust or dissatisfaction, it was about revenge. Well, two could play that game, and I was just getting started. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Webb, investigative reporter for the local newspaper. He specialized in corruption stories, the kind of muck-raking journalism that kept small-town officials honest and made lawyers nervous. Marcus, it's Wilder Sornel. I have a story you might be interested in. It's about billing fraud at one of the town's most prestigious law firms. I'm listening. How would you like to know how much money Hartwell, Riley, and Associates has been stealing from their clients? Because I have documentation that's going to make your career. I could practically hear him salivating through the phone. When can we meet? Tonight, Ray's Bar, 8 o'clock, and Marcus, bring your camera. This is going to be bigger than you think. Phase 3 was about to begin. The story hit the newspaper's website at 6 a.m. Thursday morning, complete with photocopied billing records, time-stamped phone logs, and a particularly unflattering picture of Tessa leaving the Red Maple Inn on a Tuesday afternoon when she was supposed to be in court. Marcus had outdone himself with the headline, Local Law Firm Under Investigation for Billing Fraud and Professional Misconduct. I was having coffee at Mickey's Diner when my phone started buzzing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and half the gossips in town. Word was spreading like wildfire through social media, with Mrs. Piltz leading the charge on Facebook and my daughter Katie, Ember's child from her first marriage, who I'd raised as my own, posting increasingly frantic updates on TikTok. My stepmom is trending and not in a good way. Read her latest post, complete with crying emojis and a link to the newspaper article. This is so embarrassing. Why can't adults just act like adults? Good question, kid. I'd been wondering the same thing. My phone rang again. This time it was Ember, probably calling from her office landline since I still had her cell phone. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message while finishing my eggs. Wilder, please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. People are calling for investigations and Tessa might lose her license. Please call me back. Too far. That was rich, coming from someone who'd been planning her affair in billable hours and using marital funds to pay for motel rooms. But I had to admit, seeing the panic in her voice gave me a certain satisfaction. The diner's bell chimed, and Brooks walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and he had the kind of desperate look that comes from watching your carefully constructed life collapse in real time. He spotted me in my corner booth and walked over with the determined stride of a man who'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in his head. We need to talk, he said, sliding into the seat across from me without invitation. Do we? I took another sip of coffee and studied his face. I thought we said everything we needed to say at the motel. You're destroying innocent people, Wilder. Tessa never did anything to you. Innocent? I laughed, loud enough to draw stares from the other customers. Brooks, she orchestrated your entire affair. She introduced you to my wife, encouraged the relationship, provided cover stories, and helped coordinate your meetings. The only thing she didn't do was book the room for you. She was just being a friend. A friend who billed clients for the time she spent planning your romantic getaways? A friend who used her position at a prestigious law firm to facilitate adultery? Some friend. Brooks leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Look, I know what we did was wrong, but this crusade of yours is hurting people who don't deserve it. Call off your reporter friend. Make this stop. Why would I do that? Because we're family. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Family. The same family he'd betrayed when he started sleeping with my wife. The same family bonds he'd shattered for the sake of a few hours of passion in a cheap motel room. Family, I repeated slowly. You mean like when you use the family account? The emergency fund I set up for Mom's medical bills to pay for your affair? Like when you sat at my dinner table making jokes while you were planning your next rendezvous with my wife? That kind of family? Brooks's face flushed red. I never meant for it to happen. It just what? Your pants accidentally fell off? You accidentally drove to a motel? You accidentally betrayed the one person who always had your back? You don't understand what it's like, he said, his voice rising. You've always had everything. The successful business, the beautiful wife, the nice house. Some of us have to struggle for what we want. So you decided to take what was mine. I decided to follow my heart. I stared at him for a long moment. This man who shared my genes, but apparently none of my values. Your heart. Right. And where is your heart leading you now, Brooks? Because from where I sit, it looks like it's leading you straight to bankruptcy and professional ruin. His composure cracked. The licensing board is investigating me. I might lose my real estate license over this. And for what? Because you can't handle the fact that your wife fell in love with someone else? My wife fell in love with the idea of rebellion. You just happened to be convenient. I stood up and threw a $10 bill on the table. But don't worry, brother, I'm not done with you yet. This is just the opening act. I left him sitting there in that diner, surrounded by the curious stares of our neighbors and the wreckage of his reputation. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of burning leaves and new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Sornel, this is James Riley, managing partner at Hartwell, Riley & Associates. We need to discuss the situation with Ms. Malden and your wife. Can you come in this afternoon? I smiled and typed back. 2:00. And Mr. Riley, bring your checkbook. We're going to discuss compensation for the emotional distress your employees have caused. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd planned. Ember's career was in jeopardy, Tessa was facing professional sanctions, and Brooks was looking at the possible loss of his license. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I had one more surprise up my sleeve, and this one was going to hurt them where they least expected it. I drove to the storage unit I'd rented the week before and pulled out the boxes I'd been collecting for months. Financial records, property deeds, tax documents, and a particularly interesting file folder labeled Brooks Carvin, Professional Misconduct. It turned out my brother had been cutting corners in his real estate business for years. Undisclosed dual agency, kickbacks from mortgage brokers, and at least 3 instances of misrepresenting property conditions to buyers. I'd been gathering evidence for months, originally planning to confront him privately and demand he clean up his act. Now, that evidence was going to serve a different purpose. I called Marcus Webb again. How would you like a follow-up story? Something about real estate fraud and consumer protection violations. What do you have? Everything. Names, dates, amounts, victims. Enough to keep you in headlines for a month. Send it over. I spent the next hour uploading files to a secure server, each document another nail in Brooks's professional coffin. By the time I was finished, I had enough evidence to destroy his career completely, but that still wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand the full scope of what they'd lost, the magnitude of their betrayal. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness I'd felt sitting in that kitchen, reading their messages and realizing my entire life had been a lie. I wanted them to know what it felt like when someone you trusted decided to destroy you for sport. My phone rang. Ember again, still calling from her office. This time I answered. Hello, Ember. Wilder, thank God. We need to talk. This whole thing is spiraling out of control. Is it? From where I sit, it seems like everything is going exactly according to plan. Please, I know you're angry, but you're hurting innocent people. Tessa might lose her job. Brooks could lose his license. And Katie, she's getting harassed at school because of all this publicity. Innocent people. I let the words hang in the air. Tell me, Ember, which part of this involves innocent people? The part where you committed adultery? The part where Tessa helped cover it up? Or the part where Brooks used family money to pay for your affair? You never meant to get caught. There's a difference. Silence on the other end. Then, in a smaller voice, what do you want from us? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to feel what I felt when I realized the 3 people I trusted most in the world had been lying to me for months. I want you to know what it's like when your entire life gets turned upside down because someone decided to betray you. And then what? After we've suffered enough to satisfy your need for revenge, then what? I considered the question. What did come next? After the newspaper stories and the professional sanctions and the public humiliation, what was left? Then you live with the choices you made, I said finally, just like I have to live with mine. I hung up and sat in my truck, watching the traffic flow past on Route 9. Somewhere out there, Ember was probably crying in her office, realizing that her career and her marriage were both over. Brooks was probably pacing his apartment, calculating how much money he'd lose when the licensing board came after him. And Tessa was probably calling lawyers, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to her professional reputation. They were all getting exactly what they deserved. So why did I feel so empty? My phone buzzed with another call. This time it was Katie, my stepdaughter, the one innocent person in this whole mess. Dad, can we talk? Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? Everything. Her voice was thick with tears. Everyone at school is talking about Mom and Uncle Brooks. They're saying terrible things. Some kids are making jokes about our family. I just want it to stop. And there it was. The one consequence I hadn't fully considered. In my quest for justice, I'd forgotten about the collateral damage. Katie didn't deserve to be humiliated because of her mother's choices. I'm sorry, honey. I never wanted you to get hurt by this. Then make it stop, please. I don't care what Mom did. I just want my family back. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest. It's not that simple. Why not? Why can't you just forgive her and move on? People make mistakes. Some mistakes can't be forgiven. That's not what you taught me. You always said family was the most important thing, that we should stick together no matter what. She was right, of course. I had taught her that, back when I believed it myself. Things are complicated right now, Katie, but I promise you, whatever happens between your mother and me, it won't change how I feel about you. You're my daughter, and I love you. But you don't love Mom anymore. The question hit me like a physical blow. Did I still love Ember? After everything she'd done, everything she'd destroyed, was there still some part of me that wanted to forgive her and try again? I love who she used to be, I said finally. But that person is gone. We talked for a few more minutes, with me trying to reassure her and her trying to understand how her world had fallen apart so quickly. When she hung up, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, thinking about family and forgiveness and the price of revenge. But in the end, I started the truck and drove toward my meeting with James Riley. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive. And some people needed to learn that actions had consequences, no matter who got hurt in the process.